Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. It's that time again. We are starting our weekend with watches, and everything on this show is for sale. Lately arrived and delineated in the description below with names, references, and when available, prices. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details. And if you're looking to sell a watch, we are looking to buy. One watch, an entire collection, no upper limit on value paid. We are always looking to add inventory. And to sell a watch, reach out to me all the same. Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Let's jump straight in. Let's jump in with a piece that frankly gets overlooked. Yes, I know the GMT, the Daytona, and the Submariner are always the watches in the press, social media, forums. The community goes crazy over those sports watches, but Rolex's most purely beautiful timepiece must be this 228239 with olive green sunburst dial. This is the Day-Date 40, white gold, 40 millimeters in diameter, 100 meters water resistant with a 3-day power reserve. It features that classic Rolex President bracelet. The watch is nicknamed the President because of its illustrious owner history, but of course the bracelet since 1955 has been called the President from the time it launched on this model. What's new for this generation is that the pins in the bracelet are now ceramic coated, so the white gold links cannot aggress against the pins cannot thin out, and the bracelet cannot stretch. Throw it on the wrist, and my wrist is 16 centimeters circumference. You get a good sense of this watch's overall dimensions and proportions. It's handsome, it's low slung, low cut, comfortable, and unlike the enormous Day-Date 2, which is over 53 millimeters across the wrist, this is only 47.5 millimeters across the wrist, meaning even a smaller wrist can wear it well. It's got a double quick-set chronometer movement, and it is highly anti-magnetic, and again, 100 meters water resistant, so this is actually a very sporty dress watch, bordering on pure sports watch status. We're not done with Rolex, though. I promised you in the thumbnail that we would have an Oysterflex Daytona, and here it is. This model was launched in 2017 alongside a rose gold and a yellow gold Oysterflex, that is strap bracelet Daytona. For most, this would be by far the most versatile of the three, with a gunmetal sunburst dial, a white gold case and 40 millimeter, and of course, the modern day Daytona ceramic bezel to deflect scratches and scuffs. Throw it on the wrist, and again, like the Day-Date 40, it's an easy watch to wear. It doesn't have the severe lines of the super case sports watch. Actually, the case itself looks a little bit more like a Datejust, or even a Day-Date. It's graceful, it's sporty, yes, but it also has the elegance of a dress watch, and at only 12.2 millimeters thick, it also has the compact, cuffable profile to match. 100 meters water resistant. The bracelet is truly that, as the Oysterflex is a titanium alloy band, highly flexible, with a very thick rubber sheath. Now you can see there's a bellows system on the underside, and this is a brand new Rolex Oysterflex strap bracelet, and that bellows will cinch it down to ensure a tight fit, yes, but also to create an air pocket that vents the wrist well on a hot day. As you can see, built in, there's a 5 millimeter easy link system, so you can fold in, fold out, adjust the fit, clamshell, as well as a lift lock, very secure. 3-day power reserve, chronometer certified, anti-magnetic, again, 100 meters water resistant. It features both vertical clutch and column wheel for its chronograph mechanism, meaning it's crisp to actuate, but then it also has smooth engagement. And unlike many lateral clutch chronographs, you can leave this chronograph running full time. No additional wear, tear, or hazard to the movement. Where Rolex goes, so does Omega. And these days, the Diver 300 meter from the Seamaster collection really is looking like the buy among dive watches. It's rivaled only by the new Oris Aquis Date Caliber 400 for overall value. This design, which has stood the test of time, having originally been launched in 1993, rose to fame on the wrist of Pierce Brosnan during his turn as Agent 007, but remarkably, after the promotion ended, the model continued to be associated with Bond and the Bond lore. Hey, celebrities and product placement aside, it's just a good-looking watch. Now, entering 1, 2, 3, 4 decades of production, this is a timepiece that represents the most enduring Seamaster design of all time. As prior to the original Diver 300 meter, the Seamaster had regularly been redesigned every 5 to 15 years. This one is beginning to show legs comparable to, dare I say it, the Blancpain 50 Fathoms and the Rolex Submariner. Now, when you move down to the clasp, you can see that this model, which was redesigned for 2018, adds a second adjustment. Yes, you have the long-running fold-out dive extension, but you also have a push-button slider that gives you almost 10 millimeters of incremental adjustment. So that's a lot of overall extension if you wish to use it over a dive suit or just to resize depending on your activity or the heat of the day. Now you can also see that half links are built into the bracelet, so you have many different degrees of adjustment. The timepiece, of course, features a ceramic bezel, but also a ceramic dial. As you can see, zirconium oxide. It's printed right below the hands. It's actually etched by laser. You have those famous skeleton hands that are iconic of this model line, and the Omega Wave dial. The timepiece is a 55-hour power reserve master chronometer certified, virtually amagnetic and highly shock tolerant, caliber 8800, stop seconds, quick set date, and a full balance bridge with a free spring index to make it very, very hardy and tough in the face of water, against which it is 300 meters water resistant, against shock, against which it is braced, and with a silicon amagnetic hairspring, it can resist almost as much magnetic force as is created at point blank by an MRI. Truly impressive stuff. Let's do a Lume Shot. And here you can see that this is a smart diver. First of all, the skeleton hands don't count against the legibility. You can see that even the shafts of the hands have been loomed, so it's not just a tip. You can also see that the minute hand and the bezel pearl are green to make it easy enough to read them relative to each other at a glance in the dark or in the depths. Sticking with our sports watch theme, you gotta love the third generation Vacheron Constantin Overseas. Now, this is the chronograph, 42.5 millimeters in stainless steel. This is a watch launched in 2016 and immediately became the class-leading product. There is no Audemars Piguet or Patek Philippe that's truly on par with this watch, given everything that it offers. First, 25,000 ampere per meter anti-magnetic, and that in spite of a display caseback. Second, 150 meters water resistant. Eat your heart out, Royal Oak Offshore. Only the offshore diver surpasses this watch's rating. Now, there's more to it than that, as we now have a quick release bracelet system, and this watch comes with 2 straps and a spare deployant clasp for the straps. The straps are both rubber and leather. Dress up or dress down at your pleasure. Through the case back, let's get real close here. You can see that we have our first ever manufacture movement in an overseas chronograph. Now, 2016 is no longer current events, but it's still rather remarkable that from 1996 to 2015, you never had a manufacture movement Vacheron overseas. That changed in a big way, and as you can see, this is as good as it gets, adjusted in 5 positions and finished to the standards of the Poisson de Genève. This, of course, is the caliber 5200. More than 52 hours of power reserve. It features both a vertical clutch and a column wheel like the Rolex Daytona we just saw. And note how many finishings there are on the 22 karat, not 21, not 18, 22 karat winding mass. You have both high polish, well, both. You've got outboard satin finish, then you have media blasting, then you have chiseling, then you have high polish, and all of that with a lovely compass rose motif. This is finished by hand, but then again, so is the entire movement, which features mirrored anglage, immaculate Côte de Genève stripes, and of course engine turning on the base plate with black polish on the regulator cap, as well as every screw head. It is truly impressive stuff. The bracelet is probably the best in the business. Not only do you get the quick release system, which makes it an absolute blast to size and reshoe your watch, but note that every single link on this bracelet is removable for perfect sizing. There's a half link built in. You can also see that there are micro adjustments built into the clasp, one on each side of the clasp. 1.5 millimeters, you can pull in, you can pull out, and as you can see, you pull in or you pull out, you push in, and you've got one of those micro adjustments on each side of the clasp. What you also have is a lovely rolled bevel along the shoulders of the links, and you can see that inboard, the inner faces of these links, note the Maltese cross motif repeating, but the inner faces of these links are all individually bright polished, and this is the kind of finishing of parts you only occasionally see that speaks to the integrity of the process and the product it creates. That never gets old. It's just a ton of fun to play with this bracelet. And the watch itself is legitimately gorgeous, and you can see that movement is fully deserving of the Poisson de Genève. Okay, let's stick with the Holy Trinity, but let's get thin, ultra thin. This, only 6.8 millimeters thick in white gold. It's the 41 millimeter Audemars Piguet Jules Audemars self-winding. The timepiece is remarkably compact, only 6.8 millimeters thick. Remember, the Royal Oak Jumbo is about 8.1 millimeters thick, so this is substantially flatter, broad and gorgeous. You can see it features handsome welded lug construction with the case built separately from the lugs. The lugs then welded on and hand finished to remove evidence of the weld. Polished lug hoods and bezel, contrasting with the satin finished case flank. And as you can see, the dial is handsome. This is two-tone done right on a men's watch with a lovely silver sunburst, a perfectly balanced dial, applique polished rose gold indices, and then of course lovely vaulted, almost craft production leaf hands, and they have a wonderful three-dimensional quality to them. That's why I talk about craft production. These are the kind of hands you expect on watches built in dozens of copies, not hundreds or thousands. I should also mention that it is a handsome, minimally adorned dial, Audemars Piguet Swiss made. That's as good as it gets. Or perhaps I should say until you turn it over, where we have the caliber 2120. This is the same basic JLC-based automatic that you find in the Royal Oak Jumbo. What sets it apart here is that it uses an older version of the Audemars Piguet winding rotor before it became highly industrialized and rather more abbreviated in its production process. The rotor on these 2120 class movements always featured elaborate skeletonization with the Audemars Piguet logo inset and mirrored anglage with the sharpest of inward angles where the two anglage angles converge. You can see many sharp inward angles where two beveled edges converge, and that is ultimately the most difficult finishing assignment, along with black polish, in the world of the finisseur, the person who finishes the parts in the watch. So you have this handsomely handmade rotor that is a work of art in and of itself, undoubtedly taking dozens of hours to craft. But it's not even the inward angles that set it apart as much, it's the devil's horns between the A and the P. You see this linking flourish and the hard points that emerge from it? That's as difficult to achieve as these tight inward angles. Now, the movement, ultra thin at 2.4 millimeters thick. It has a full beryllium rotor that actually encircles the movement. So you can see this is a full annular winding system with the mass on one side, but the beryllium ring circumferential. It sits on 4 ruby pivots, meaning it can be sunken down close to the bridges without any danger of hitting the bridges in the case of shock. And as you can see, these 2120s are built to a different standard than Audemars Piguet's mass-produced movements. AP does make this movement in-house, and it finishes it in-house. And you can see that the bevels are a mile wide and as bright as the sun. No machined angles here. Côte de Genève, black polished screws, engine turning on the base plate. It has all of that along with satination on the wheels themselves. This is a standard of finish you do not get in a standard Audemars Piguet 3120, 4401, or 4302. Very special, handmade in and out. I mentioned the case was handcrafted, the movement was handcrafted, hand finished, and so flat when on the wrist. It's almost like a wafer. It sits lower than my wrist hair. That's how impressive it is, and it's super short across the wrist. So even if your wrist is 13 centimeters circumference, unlike my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, even if your wrist is 13, you're going to wear this well. It's a viable unisex option and also the ultimate in discretion. If you wonder why, through all the sports watches and oversized references, Audemars Piguet is considered part of the Swiss Holy Trinity, the best of the best. This watch explains it. It's almost mute testament to how great Audemars Piguet can be when it truly applies itself. Let's talk a little bit about an independent. Many would say that these days, FPJorn is the independent. Though only producing about 950 watches a year, FPJorn has built a monstrous reputation for integrity based on the individual product. 950 times a year, you get a watch that represents the best Francois-Paul Journe, not as assistants, not as corporate minders, not as shareholders. FPJorn gives you the best watch that he can create. And this, launched in 2015, was his take on the perpetual calendar. Of course, the 40e Perpetuel here in 42 millimeters with the discontinued black polished steel clover center dial. So this is a discontinued reference as you see it here. It features a perpetual calendar system that is just brilliant. I can't quite dig in with the nails I've got. Nope, maybe I can. And you can see that there is an adjuster that sits flush with the lug up at 1 o'clock, and that allows you to adjust the month. When you push it back into place, it's completely invisible. There are no pusher adjusters on the case flank, and all of the other adjustments are done using the crown. FPJorn wanted a system that required no fiddly pushers, no holes in the side of the watch, and nothing you could lose from the accessory set in order to set. So this watch can be set entirely with the equipment on the watch. Now, it's a perpetual calendar, of course. You can see the leap year cycle is coaxial with the hands. You have the day, you have the double-digit date, you have the month, and then you have a 120-hour chronometric power reserve with a power reserve indicator. In fact, the watch will run for 160 hours, but 120 is the period during which it keeps the best time. Now, this is a lovely boutique model because it combines the red gold case with the black center dial. So this would have been the boutique edition of the 42mm Quantième Perpetuel, available exclusively at FPJorn boutiques and Espace. Turn it all over and you can see the latest version of the Octacaliber 1300. Now, what sets this movement apart from many other high horology automatics is that it's made of solid gold. The rotor is cut on a rose lathe, so it's true guilloche, not stamped. It has a grand orge or barleycorn pattern, and then you can see circular Côte de Genève across the bridges. Bridges and plates are 18 karat gold. The beveling on Jorn watches keeps getting better. It's now mirrored rather than obviously machined. It started with a machine, but it's now increasingly finished by hand so that you don't have that filed look that you get on mainstream AP pieces. You can also see that there's engine turning on the base plate in two different sizes, large and then small, which is nice attention to detail. You have those circular Côte de Genève and stripes with black polished screw heads, which is my preference over blued screws because black polish never hides flaws. Truly good looking, and with a free sprung balance braced against shock, it is surprisingly tough, as this movement was also designed with sports watches in mind. Now, it's over 51 millimeters lug to lug, so in 42 millimeter size, this watch has a lot of wrist presence. It's not thick, and you can see that to good advantage. And of course, it has the perpetual calendar, which can deal with leap years, irregular length months. It doesn't need to be reset until the year 2100. It's a handsome and imposing wrist presence with a combination of black, polished steel, silver white outer dial, and of course the red gold case. This is a dramatic companion for any occasion. That said, you don't need size to sizzle, and I think the FPJorn Vagabondage 2 proves that. Now, the original Vagabondage was created using a movement that FPJorn had originally conceived for a Cartier Tour 2 jump hour that was never made. And because that movement on the Vagabondage 1 was shaped in a tonneau form, the eventual watch, the Vagabondage 1 that used the movement, also was shaped in a tonneau form. But here's the thing, that Vagabondage 1 was impressive, but it wasn't chronometer accurate, so FPJorn didn't put his name on the dial. Well, the Vagabondage 2 solved all of the underlying issues with accuracy, but it added a remarkable combination of a jumping hour and a jumping minute, while also achieving those high-level chronometer timing standards to which Jorn holds himself. So this is an accurate watch, a dramatic watch, a dynamic watch, and if you take a quick look, you can see it's also a remarkably asymmetrical watch, as the bridge featuring the seconds, the minutes, and the hours is actually asymmetrical from side to side, and at first glance you miss that. It becomes more evident the longer you look. You can also see that the mounting screws flank outboard, but then as we narrow the bridge going up, the screws themselves are actually just the pivots for the wheels that underpin the jump hour. Now, there's a smoked sapphire, so you can actually see through to the movement, but it's very dim, it's diminished. It's not dominant on the dial side. That's the bridge in the center. Power reserve indicator, and this is a energy-intensive jumping complication, so you will want to watch that power reserve. It's 8 millimeters thick, 45 millimeters lug to lug, and about 38.5 millimeters across. So on the wrist, it's broad lengthwise up and down the wrist, but it's not broad across the wrist. You can see how much clearance I've got on each side. Now, this is a platinum model. 69 examples of the platinum Vagabondage 2 were made in 2010. So this is a rare watch. The ultimate Jorn collecting theme is to put together some of the limited edition series, the 2015 38mm steel watches, the Ruthenium series of 5, and the Vagabondage series of 3. So this is going to get you well on your way to that theme, or it could be your one and only Vagabondage, or it could be your one and only Jorn. Jorn watches are a little bit like Panerai in that they all have similar cases and very similar dials, and a lot of times they look interchangeable unless you get something like the Elegant, the T30, the T10, or a Vagabondage, and the Vagabondage is anything but generic. This, in my opinion, is FPJorn at his best. Shaped movement, for the case, properly sized, all rose gold and beautifully decorated in the same fashion as the Octa we just saw, with a platinum case and a rose gold movement. Though this is not a large watch, it does have a lot of heft and substance to it. Rare for a Journe watch, there is a full deployant clasp, adding real value as well as protection against accidentally dropping this collectible piece when you're donning or removing at bedside. Put that aside for a moment. If you want the ultimate in FPJorn single watch collectability, then you probably want one of the earliest FPJorn tourbillon remontoir. Of course, the tourbillon souverain continues to this day, but back in 1999, the first watch to bear the name FPJorn was based on the first wristwatch of any kind that Journe created back in 1991. Back in 91, he coined the idea of a dial-side tourbillon with a remontoir d'égalité constant force spring, and that combination entered production as the tourbillon remontoir in 1999. The first generation tourbillon, with the exception of the ruthenium pieces, only made in 38 millimeters, as you see here. This one has a platinum case, as you can see, a yellow gold dial, and it's part of the 4th series of tourbillon remontoir. You know that because it features a large print for the power reserve scale. It's about symmetrical inside to the minutes on the dial. It also has a flat remontoir cock, characteristic of the 3rd and 4th series of the tourbillon remontoir, and then you can see that there are little screws rather than big screws on the dial side. So this is a 4th series watch, and the qualitative, I would say, progression of these models more than bears out that FPJorn, the man, and Montrejourne, the watch company, got better at assembling and finishing these, as the 4th series watches look more like a luxury product. The early ones are a bit crude. Here you can see that the dial itself features very little discoloration. They all had a heavy varnish on them that tends to fade more on the first 3 series. You can also see that the execution of the tourbillon carriage itself is immaculate. This looks like something that was destined for the top shelf. There's no crudity on these 4th series watches, but they've got the evocative open remontoir cock. They have, of course, the dial architecture of the first 4 series of watches, the size at 38 millimeters, and most importantly for those who are deeply into these things, the brass movement. The brass movement was discontinued mid-2004, and although technically a gold movement is worth more as a commodity, it's not worth more to a collector. Why? Because brass movements are less common. You can see that remontoir d'égalité, constant force spring. For 28 hours, this movement maintains constant balance amplitude, and it's the overcoil hairspring, and it's this remontoir and not the tourbillon that's responsible for the regularity of this watch and its timekeeping precision. The tourbillon carriage is beautiful, however. The overcoil is rarely seen on Journe watches, and then only on flagship chronometer style complications such as the Chronometer Optimum, or as you can see here, the tourbillon remontoir. There's a full specular polished rounded remontoir cock, or I should say balance cock, that holds the upper side of the tourbillon carriage, and you can see that the tourbillon carriage itself is a wire-like filigree with a black polished top and screws to match. A truly special watch, and one that has an imposing wrist presence in spite of not having a domineering size. This is a watch that any wrist can wear well. Now, if you're wondering how many of these were made, somewhere between 250 and 400 of the tourbillon remontoir, and we're not counting the ruthenium watches here, we're counting the 38 millimeter watches. And those first 4 series built somewhere between 250 and 400 pieces between 1999 and 2004. So they are very special, very collectible, and they're also very individual, as almost all of them on a dial basis age a little bit differently over time. A very special watch and a real landmark piece. If you're going to own just one FPJorn and you want something that's approaching the FPJorn Submariner, the FPJorn Moonwatch, the FPJorn Navitimer, or Nautilus, that is the core icon of the brand, it's going to be an early Resonance 1, or it's going to be this tourbillon remontoir. Sticking with independent horology, but of a very different stripe, we fly to New Chatel, where HYT builds about 400 watches a year, uniquely with a hydro display system. So it is a hydromechanical display system with a fluidic hour indicator, 48.8 millimeters in stainless steel. I have to say that the watch is more sapphire than stainless steel. Sapphire caseback, cambered sapphire over the entirety of the dial, wrapping around and enveloping the watch. The put it on the wrist, and though it's 48.8 millimeters, you can see how much clearance I have on both sides of my wrist. This is an easy watch to wear. Even if your wrist is as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference, you're going to find that this watch really does sit comfortably, look great, and fit perfectly. Now, of course, this model was launched in 2017. It was the first lugless watch launched by HYT, but it's the display system carried over from the H1 that really impresses. You have the seconds, the minutes, and then the hour indicator, so it's a regulator. And you can also see there's a power reserve indicator that turns from white to blue as you wind it. 65-hour power reserve, 2 liquids. The blue one is water-based, the clear one is oil-based, so there's a meniscus between them and they're immiscible, they can never mix. That meniscus represents the hour, and you can read the hour adjacent to the separation between the 2 fluids. Now watch what happens as I adjust past the turn of the hour. It's also a retrograde, and the hour indicator retrogrades all the way back to the beginning, because you can see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It just wraps around the dial and continues its path on the opposite side. 2 bellows, each containing 1 fluid, driven by cams. The movement is a conventional Swiss lever manual wind, handsomely executed and thoughtfully designed by Chronograph, which is a high-end movement maker that provides the basic Swiss lever underpinning and the standard mechanical escapement watch that gives the watch its mechanical heartbeat. And then HYT, through its Oysterflex subsidiary, develops the system for displaying the time using fluid. And a lot of this technology comes from medical equipment. Although, fun fact, the bellows containing the fluids, those are made in Philadelphia, right by me. The timepiece features a titanium deploying clasp, and you can see this one's in very good condition, having never really been worn by the original owner. And you can also see that there is a wonderful little quick adjustment system built into the clasp. There's a trigger, you depress it, and then you have about ½ a centimeter of incremental adjustment to fine-tune the fit. Every watch with a clasp should have that. Again, a very cool watch, unlike anything else out there, and with only about 400 made a year, exclusivity is assured. But it's also lumed, and I think it's important that I show you a lume shot so you know what on earth I'm talking about. I promised you a lume shot, and that's exactly what I'm delivering right here. You can see that the meniscus between the clear and the blue fluids is just as visible at night, and you can easily tell the time using this watch after dark. The fun continues when the lights go out. All right, Bremont. Building watches in Britain is an unusual thing in this day and age, and while there are a couple of craft constructors through the British Isles, the company that's undoubtedly doing the most volume in Britain is Bremont. Now, while the watches are typically known as pilot's watches or military-inspired, what we have right here, the Bremont Stephen Hawking, is anything but military-inspired. This one is inspired by the mysteries of the cosmos, and one of the most renowned popularizers of science, Stephen Hawking, who was both an innovator in the field of cosmology, as well as one who is able to communicate it with peerless clarity to the general public. This watch celebrates both of his roles and his life. He passed away in 2018, but in a lot of ways he lives on in this 41mm stainless steel limited edition of 388 pieces. There's a lot going on here. We have a piece of meteorite to remind us that Hawking helped to explain the cosmos, and you don't get any more cosmos than meteorite. The idea of outer space being sort of a mystery to be unlocked by science, it's consistent with the design of this watch. As you can see, it represents the actual sky over Oxford in January of 1942 when Stephen Hawking was born. So you have the cosmos, you have the meteorite, you have pieces of wood from his actual desk where he penned his seminal works, and then the actual numbering, the serial numbering, is on a piece of paper from one of his academic dissertations. So this is truly a sample of the life of Stephen Hawking. You've got the wood, you've got the meteorite, you've got the stars, you've got the paper, and you've also got an interesting dial that's surprisingly dynamic for a sports-style watch, as it has a retrograding seconds display. Of course, Stephen Hawking's often discussed matters of gravity and gravitational attraction and the sources of gravity. So you have a sort of gravitational matrix motif on the dial side. You also have a little marker that shows you, if you start at the index and move all the way to the red index, that is the time it takes sunlight to travel from the sun to Earth. And of course, we have an awful lot of impressive grayscale imagery on this dial. It is very clean and attractive and reasonably sized Bremont watch. It has a screw-down crown. It is exceptionally water resistant and swimmable at 100 meters. and it's got an ETA 2892 base with the retrograde module and the double-digit date added. It's a handsome watch that's easy to wear and surprisingly compact for a Bremont. A handsome and evocative piece designed to reference one of the true scientific heroes of our age. Stephen Hawking is a fascinating and complicated character. In many ways, he is just as controversial as Bremont itself often is. This is a brand that inspires strong reactions, and I think it's a perfect match, frankly, for Bremont's mission to have a Stephen Hawking watch. He was a fascinating and difficult person to summarize in a watch review. So I'm just going to say this is a cool and all-in effort that absolutely loads up on Stephen Hawking mythos and imagery, and a very cool way for the brothers English to spend their development dollars. Jumping back into the world of Swiss independent horology, let me grab my polishing cloth. We've got the Moser Pioneer Center Second Swiss Mad. We've got Swiss Red with a Fume fashion fade from bright red to black at the edge. You can see that there's a chaptering, fully loomed out board. The watch screw-down crown is 120 meters water resistant. And you've got the caliber HMC 200 with a 3-day power reserve. It's a sports watch movement, so it's shock tolerant, it's tough, it's also good looking. And the watch itself in stainless steel is 42.8 millimeters. So on my wrist, you can see it's big, but it's not overwhelming. I could recommend it for a wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference, and it is handsome. This is an all-new offering that's got a lot of intensity to it, so whether you're Swiss mad or merely like to see red, this is the watch for you. And since it's a sports watch, let's do a Lume Shot. There you go. The Moser Pioneer Center Seconds by night. We're on an independent brand kick, so let's talk about Tim and Bart Groeneveld of the Netherlands. In late 2018, for the 2019 model year, they launched the Principia Automatic. The 1941 Principia, and we spoke of Stephen Hawking's cosmology and theories of the universe. In many regards, his era of physics, started by Einstein in the early 20th century, supplanted the era of Isaac Newton. And this watch is named after Principia Mathematica. That's not the entire title of the work, but it essentially designed a method for understanding physics right up to the age of Einstein. And it was so dominant in its time that the brothers Groeneveld named their watch after it. You have a cream lacquer dial with a Dutch orange 60, fired stainless steel hands in blue, a remarkably involved and nuanced 39.5 millimeter red gold case, and it's only 47 millimeters lug to lug, which makes it really easy to wear on a small wrist. Turn it all over and things are just as intense. This is the sixth movement from the Groeneveld brothers of the Netherlands. They formerly worked at Audemars Piguet, Renault Papi, and you can really see the pedigree coming through. First, note the bell gable shape of the bridges. They're shaped like traditional Dutch roofs. There's also the fact that the bridges are made of stainless steel, which is extraordinarily tough to finish. Brass is soft, steel is hard, but you can see that they've media blasted the interior, they've created a raised ridge in satin around the edge of each bridge, and then they've absolutely mirror finished these bevels. They are a mile wide in the finest tradition of craft horology, where you can do this kind of thing that you're not able to achieve on a large scale at a mainstream brand. The rotor itself is just as handsome, with a chiseled center, raised and polished logo, beveled edges. Look at these outward points, mirrored anglage a mile wide, and then that raised satin border around the rotor. It's actually a tough movement with a free sprung index and a full balance bridge. Automatic winding, it actually has a 56-hour power reserve, and as you can see, it's adjusted in 6 positions, which is better than a chronometer because it doesn't have that one bailout position where the watchmaker typically can hide all of the error in the operation. 5-position watches have error hidden in that 6th position, the one that's not timed. This watch, timed in 6 positions and regulated accordingly, leaves no place for deviation and imprecision to hide. That is gorgeous. If I had to describe the dial, I would say off-white. It's got an eggshell color and an eggshell texture. It is very attractive. And of course, the Groeneveld brothers are a lot of fun and very active in online watch communities, so it's easy to reach out and touch your watchmaker with these guys. And hey, an ostrich strap. Of course, it was going to have to end with Lange, because I always end with Lange. And since this is the Zeitwerk striking, let's go for a big turn. Let's advance to the turn of the hour, and have some fun. Launched in 2011, this 44mm model, the Zeitwerk Striking, became Lange's first chiming watch. Following up on the success of the GPHG Eggy winning 2009 Zeitwerk Jump Hour and Jump Minute, this watch combines the same basic movement with a striking mechanism that strikes on the hour as well as the quarter. And if you want to play with it, there's a little trigger over at 4 o'clock that lets you show off. As you can see, the gongs are black polished, the strikers are black polished, the time bridge, which is actually part of the movement, still visible on the dial side, and you can see there's a little clear pivot that acts as the pivot point for there's a clear sapphire, and that's the pivot point for the 2 discs displaying the minutes. You've got a jumping hour, you've got this German silver component known as the time bridge that frames the time, and then on the other side, you've got the caliber L043 upgraded with striking functionality. It has the same basic ingredients as the landmark L043 from 2009. So you have a black polished stopworks atop a barrel with a spring that is so massive and powerful that one end of it is anchored to the base plate. It continues through a drivetrain that first jumps the minutes. The energy is then transferred to a sort of pinwheel that acts as an air brake to slow down the transmission of energy through a second locking lever that once per minute transfers energy to a hairspring that is sandwiched between 2 third wheels under my finger, and that hairspring is a circular, or I should say spiral, remontoir de galette. In contrast to the linear spring used by FPJorn, Lange uses a hairspring. The result is that once a minute, the energy is transferred to the hairspring, and the hairspring energy, not the mainspring barrel, drives the escapement, maintaining constant amplitude for the full 36 hours of the watch's power reserve, so that enormous mainspring is not going to overdrive the escapement, which it would do if it were directly driving the lever system. Now you can see the finishing is handsome. Not only is there mile-wide mirrored anglage on the German silver bridges, and it's nickel copper zinc with the copper giving it its golden hue, but you can see the same mirrored anglage on the steel components of the remontoir assembly, which is, as we learned from Grunefeld, very hard to do. You can see glasuta stripes across the bridges, engine turning on the base plate, black polish on the screw heads, as well as the swan's neck regulator, as well as the cover to the escape wheel, hairspring, overcoil, not flat hairspring, as is common on Lange watches. It is an overcoil adjusted in 5 positions, and it is an 18K beat rate, so it's nice and slow and stately like a pocket watch. Freehand engraving on both the balance cock and the escape wheel cock, and you can see that there are both polished and blued screws used on this movement. Fired screws here are used for fixing components in place. Polished screws are used for adjustment of the mechanism. Now, on the wrist, it is a substantial watch. 44 millimeters means that 15 centimeters circumference is probably the smallest wrist that can wear this well, but what a pleasure. It feels its price. And I always like to say, when a watch has that substance and that heft to it, it feels as luxurious as it looks. And a rare feature on a Lange timepiece is a folding clasp. This would have been ordered as an option at the point of purchase, because in general, these would come with pin buckles. A very impressive watch, and horologically speaking, as good as it gets. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details of anything you saw on today's show.